My name is Conrad. I represent Effective Altruism Geneva, which has a group called Sentience Politics. And there, with this group, we try to use reason and evidence to figure out how to do the most good for human and non-human animals. And Effective Altruism is a relatively young movement that can basically be phrased in one question. That is, how can we use our limited resources to have the biggest possible impact? And when it comes to trillions of fish that we consume and that we have an impact on, there's a lot to be done. So we're very happy to have this event here tonight. And Yves will talk a little more about the campaign. And then Sébastien is going to introduce the speaker. So have a nice evening.
Donc c'était Conrad de Effective Altruisme. Moi je suis Yves Bonnardel de PEA pour l'égalité animale qui co-organise avec Effective Altruisme. Donc c'est une organisation égalitariste de Suisse romande qui se bat sur la question animale tout particulièrement. Du coup on a donc invité Jonathan Balcombe à faire une conférence. Sébastien Moreau qui est présent, qui est aussi un spécialiste de la question aquatique et des poissons, va présenter rapidement Jonathan Balcombe, et puis on laissera la parole à Jonathan Balcombe. Avant, je voulais parler rapidement de la campagne, qui sont les poissons, dans le cadre de laquelle se situe cette conférence. C'est une campagne qui a été initiée par PEA, mais qui est une campagne mondiale, qui en est à sa première année, qui débute tout juste, qui est d'ores et déjà soutenue par une quarantaine d'organisations dans le monde, dont des grosses organisations comme PITA ou L214 en France ou Sea Shepherd. C'est une campagne qui vise à faire émerger la question aquatique, émerger la question des individus sentients, les poissons d'une part, mais aussi les céphalopodes, c'est-à-dire les pieuvres, les calmars, les seiches, mais aussi les crustacés, les homards, les crabes, les crevettes, mais aussi les langoustines, etc. Ce sont des animaux qui sont très peu connus, pour lesquels on éprouve très peu d'empathie, du fait qu'on a l'impression qu'ils ne sont pas expressifs, ils ne crient pas, ils n'ont pas de mimique faciale, etc. Et pourtant, comme va nous l'expliquer Jonathan Balcombe, ce sont des individus sentients qui ressentent des sensations et des émotions, et pour lesquels on pense que du fait justement qu'ils ressentent des sensations, ils ont des intérêts, ils éprouvent dans leur chair ce qui leur arrive, et on devrait prendre en compte leurs intérêts. Et la campagne « Qui sont les poissons » vise à faire prendre conscience de l'existence de ces animaux et du fait qu'ils ont des intérêts qu'on devrait prendre en considération. C'est une campagne qui trouve son point d'orgue, qui trouvera son point d'orgue chaque année avec la Journée mondiale pour la fin de la pêche, qui a lieu demain. Et notamment, demain à Genève, PEA organise une journée de stand de Place du Mollard, de 10h à 17h, où il y aura l'expo poisson en plus grand que ce qui est exposé ici. C'est une exposition de 12 panneaux qui essayent de présenter un petit peu ce qu'on appelle la question aquatique, et pas mal la question des pêches et des élevages aquacoles. Et puis, à 15h, place des Nations, PEA organise un grand happening pour dénoncer justement les pêches et les élevages aquacoles. Qu'est-ce que je pourrais rajouter sur tout ça ? Oui, simplement, alors PEA et Effective Altruisme sont des associations qui sont composées de bénévoles, qui entièrement, c'est un travail bénévole. Et on a installé une petite caisse, une crousille, comme on dit ici, à l'extérieur, pour si vous voulez participer aux frais de déplacement de Jonathan Balcombe, eh ben c'est bienvenu, c'est laissé à votre libre appréciation. Mais en tout cas, sachez que vous pouvez verser une participation libre. Voilà. Et puis je voulais remercier l'ensemble des personnes qui ont travaillé à ce qu'existe cette campagne poisson. La campagne, elle s'appelle « Qui sont les poissons ?» donc. Ce sont des dizaines de personnes en Suisse, mais tout autant dans le monde entier, en fait, qui ont travaillé à ce que cette campagne existe et à ce que, par exemple, demain, il y ait des actions dans une quinzaine de pays différents, donc pour la Journée mondiale pour la fin de la pêche. Donc je remercie tout le monde qui a travaillé bénévolement, encore une fois, à faire que cette campagne existe, et notamment cette soirée avec Jonathan Balcombe. Sébastien, voilà. Merci.
Bon, merci à tous d'être là. Donc, le conférencier de ce soir, Jonathan Balcombe, dont on a déjà pas mal parlé, est biologiste. Il est titulaire d'un doctorat en éthologie, qui est la science du comportement animal, de l'Université du Tennessee, où il a étudié la communication chez les chauves-souris. Il a été l'auteur de plus d'une cinquantaine de publications sur de très nombreux sujets, que ça va de la nidification des tortues jusqu'à l'éthique dans la dissection dans les études supérieures. Il est également l'auteur de plusieurs livres, notamment son premier livre, Pleasurable Kingdom, qui est un livre qui montre que les autres animaux peuvent aussi apprécier leur existence, apprécier leur vie. Il a également écrit The Exultant Ark et Second Nature, qui sont également des livres qui ont pour vocation de montrer les animaux sous un autre jour et qui laissent présager d'une future révolution sur nos relations entre eux. Donc, c'est également quelqu'un qui est engagé dans la défense animale depuis longtemps. Il travaille pour la Human Society, qui est une grosse association de protection animale américaine. Il est également le fondateur et le directeur du journal Animal Sentience, qui est un journal scientifique en libre accès. Pour ceux qui sont anglophones, je le conseille. D'ailleurs, c'est un journal qui réunit des scientifiques qui discutent de la capacité de différents animaux à pouvoir ressentir des émotions et qui ne parlent vraiment que de ça. C'est-à-dire, vous avez eu un grand débat sur la souffrance des poissons, notamment, qui est extrêmement intéressant. Vous en avez sur le deuil chez les animaux, sur la sentience des insectes. Et Jonathan Balcombe, l'année dernière, a sorti le livre What a Fish Knows, qui est devenu un best-seller assez rapidement et qui fait une espèce de, on va dire, panel des connaissances actuelles que l'on a, d'un point de vue scientifique, qui ont explosé dans les 15 dernières années, sur le monde intime des poissons, la vie des poissons et ce qui se passe dans leur univers qui nous était quand même assez étranger jusque maintenant. C'est également quelqu'un qui est beaucoup intervenu dans des documentaires de la BBC, du National Geographic, ou dans des journaux comme le Washington Post, le New York Times, ou également la revue encore plus célèbre, Nature. Donc voilà, c'est lui qui va vous présenter ce soir cette conférence, qui va résumer certaines parties de son livre. Le livre est en vente, il me semble, et je vous le conseille très fortement. Alors il est en anglais, mais c'est vraiment un excellent bouquin que j'ai beaucoup apprécié en tout cas. Donc voilà, je présente Jonathan Balcombe.
Merci, Sébastien, who knows more about me than I do. And I don't speak much French. One of the few things I can say is je ne peux parler en français. I can't speak French, so please forgive me for having to speak in English. I will try to speak slowly and clearly, and there has been efforts to make some of the text of my talk more accessible to non-English speaking. But I'm always humbled when I come to Europe because everybody's pretty good at English, and I don't know any Swiss or Schweizerdeutsch or German, very little French. So thank you for bearing with me as I present in English. And I'm very impressed with all the signs, and thank you also for taking time out of your busy lives to be here tonight. I was going to be much smarter looking, although I do like the sweater. I might steal it from you, Sebastian. Do let me know. I finished my thought. I had a delay in my flight, so I literally went from the airport to here. I try to look a little more smart when I give talks because I think, as an ambassador for animals, I want to look professional, but I think I look professional enough. So. Do let me know if you cannot hear me at any point. Is it okay at the back? Can you hear me? Okay. Okay. Thumbs up. Good. Do let me know if it gets quiet or if I fade off, because that's important you hear me. I'll just switch to another microphone. Great. I'm going to start out with a little personal story from when I was 8 years old. I don't know if that's right, but I tried. I stepped into an aluminum rowboat with the elderly director of a summer camp in Canada, north of Toronto. And he rowed us about 1/4 mile into the bay, and we spent the next 2 hours fishing. And it was my first experience fishing. And I was very good at it. I caught 16 fish that night. And Mr. Nelson did all the dirty work. He put the worms on the hooks. He pulled the hooks out of the fish's faces. And the big ones, he plunged his knife into their heads to kill them. So the little ones were thrown back. But as a sensitive boy who liked animals, a lot of what went on in that boat was disturbing to me, upsetting to me. But this kindly man in the front of the boat who did all the dirty work, he didn't seem to think there was anything wrong. So I reasoned that it must be okay. I never took a shine to fishing. When it came time to bait my own hooks and remove them from fish's mouths, I soon lost my interest. I just couldn't help seeing it from the fish's perspective. That was 50 years ago, and to this day we really generally see fishes in one of two ways: as a source of food or a source of pleasure and recreation and sport. So benign and beloved is the idea of fishing that it's often used gratuitously as a symbol of all that's good about life. A nice way to spend a Sunday afternoon, sort of thing. And we see this in advertising and symbolic use. So often I see fishing as a symbol in advertising, something good. Today I want to encourage you to see fishes through a different lens. I've spent the last 4 years swimming among fish and researching them and writing about them in various places, including some nice places like Puerto Rico, a good place to see fishes. Culminating in this book, which aims to hopefully open our eyes to a group of animals that have been underestimated, grossly misunderstood. In my job as an ethologist, I do a lot of reading, looking at the news and at the scientific reports of what animals do. And I realized that fishes are amazing. They do great things. But so little of that filters up to the general public, the consciousness of non-scientists. So I thought, let's write a book that makes this stuff accessible. And I've learned as a science writer that it's important to include stories as well, because science can reach here, but stories are more likely to reach here. So the book is also sprinkled with credible stories of my own and other people who helped me with that part of the research. So I want to just share with you tonight just some of the highlights. I mean, I can't cover everything in a book, but I can certainly cover some of the key points that I make in the book, some of the key discoveries we have about these misunderstood creatures. And I want to start out with just to try and impress upon you how successful fishes are. We really live in an age of fishes. The age of mammals is kind of in the past. Mammalian diversity has declined. Fish diversity in the last few tens of millions of years has really flourished and blossomed. And to that end, we have an estimated 32,000 described species. There may be as many as 40,000 species in all, but of those we've described, it's more than all the other groups of vertebrates combined. And as you may expect, with such diversity, we have a range of sizes from a tiny little Philippine fish, freshwater fish. Adults are only less than maybe 5 millimeters, 6 millimeters, 7 millimeters long. You can put 300 of them on one side of a scale, and an American penny, a small coin, Swiss coin on the other, and the coin would go down. They're that tiny. At the other end of the scale, we have among the bony fishes the sunfish, ocean sunfish, which increases from an egg by up to 60 million times to become a 100-year-old, 1.5-ton adult. And that reminds me to tell you that there's actually, we think of 5 major groups of vertebrates: mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, and fishes. There are actually 6 today living, because the fishes can be broken down into 2 groups: the bony fishes, teleosts, and the chondrichthyans, or the cartilaginous, the sharks and rays. They're as different from each other, those 2 groups, as birds from mammals. So really there's 2 major groups of fishes to be aware of. And among the chondrichthyans, our cartilaginous ones, we have the new standing record for longevity among vertebrates. The Greenland shark, which lives in cold waters and grows very slowly, now is estimated that, based on studies of corneal layers, a little bit like tree rings, to live close to 400 years, and maybe 100 years before reaching sexual maturity. So a very protracted lifespan. And as we may expect from such diversity, we have a range of beautiful shapes and sizes and colors. And I love some of the names that people have given to fishes. The clown triggerfish is, I think, a very suitable name for this one. For one of the more outrageous names, oh dear, what is this one called? Sarcastic fringehead. Thank you for having the words. I'm a little jet lagged and my brain isn't working fully. And then we have outrageous names like hairy-jawed slackmouth, which is actually a deep-sea angelfish, anglerfish, and I'll come back to those. The Picasso triggerfish, known to the Hawaiian locals as Humuhumu Nuku Nuku Apua'a, which is the fish who sews with a needle and grunts like a pig, apparently, according to the language. I'm going to speak in Hawaii in June. I'll ask them about that and see if that's correct. They'll correct me if I'm wrong. And then perhaps the inadvertently rudest name, at least in English, the Halocaris vittatus, otherwise known as the slippery dick, which I guess is penis glissant. Is it penis? Penis. Okay, glissant. All right, well, now I don't know in French. I'll probably forget. But I like this one, perhaps my favorite, the diagonal-banded sweet lips. I don't know about you, but when I see them, I just want to give them a kiss. And also true to their diversity, fishes have bizarre things happen to them. Flatfishes have to suffer the indignity of having one eye migrate from one side of the face to the other during what must be a very awkward adolescence. Very useful adaptation allows them to see up from lying on their side on the bottom in the sand, where they're very well camouflaged, so they can be a very effective ambush predator. The eye migrates in as little as 5 days in some species. It obviously is very effective because they're a very diverse and very numerous group of fishes. Unfortunately for them, many, many millions are caught by humans to be eaten. And not all fishes have fins. Some of them crawl around on legs and feet and toes. The toadfishes, of which there are some 40 species, they're great at camouflaging themselves with coloration that matches their surroundings. And they are also ambush predators that suddenly open their big mouth and gulp in whatever unsuspecting prey is there. Perhaps most bizarre of all, certainly in terms of sexual reproduction, is the deep-sea anglerfishes. There's about 160 known species. There's probably more. These all live in the abyss, the permanently dark area of the oceans where the light never penetrates because it's so deep. And so males, who are always looking for females, they have big nostrils and big eyes to see the light signals that females use. Even though it's dark, they have a symbiotic relationship with bacteria who help them to produce light, so they can signal like fireflies, like flashlight beetles. I don't know what you call them here. But so they can find each other that way. And if a male finds a female of the right species, he better make the most of the opportunity. And what he does, he bites onto her. I can't give you much surprise because you probably already read it now in the slide. So I can't sort of, wow, look at that. But you already saw it. But anyway, he bites into her. Doesn't really matter where on the body it is. Could be on the head, on the belly. And that's it. He latches on and he stays there for the rest of his and her life. And scientists have called it sexual parasitism. I don't really like the term because it implies that it's bad for the female. But really, if the female doesn't have a male attached to her, then her reproductive life is a dead end. So I think maybe it's welcome. A little strange, but a welcome thing. And as you can see from this picture, sometimes 2 and 3 or even 4 males will end up attached to a female. So for any radical feminists in the group, it is actually sometimes true that some males only do ever amount to an appendage. At least in English, that's a joke. Some of my jokes are a bit cryptic with a French-speaking audience. Thank you for those who laughed. Fishes probably invented all of the main senses that we use certainly for vertebrates, vision, smell, taste, touch. They also probably invented color vision. They live in some very colorful environments, and there's no point in having colors if you can't see them. Very little point. And they have senses that we don't have, including an ability to sense changes in water pressure and movements in the water, thanks to a row of specialized scales along the midline called the lateral line. It looks dark on fishes, probably because, in fact, I'm looking around to see if there's a picture. You might be able to see it. You might just make it out here. It's the shadow cast by the depression in the scales that makes it look dark. And if you look under a high magnification microscope, up in there are little pits, little depressions within the depression with little gels and little hairs that stick out that are very responsive to movements and pressure changes. And that signals to the fish that there's an object there or somebody's moving nearby. They, of course, are in the water 24/7. They're in there all night long as well. It helps to know that somebody maybe bigger than you is swimming nearby, and you can take refuge. And fishes like blind cave fishes who've lost the use of their eyes because there's no point in spending the energy to produce vision if you can't use it in a permanently dark environment. They've been shown in studies at Oxford University to learn how to navigate very quickly in their environment, to know where the rocks are, to know where places are that they might bump into, using their memory without ever seeing it. Interestingly, if you raise a blind cavefish in a light environment where they get light, the eyes develop normally and they can see. So they have all the genetic material for coding for vision. It's just if they grow up in a dark environment, they have no need for that, and their body, the darkness doesn't trigger the development of the eyes. It's a nice example of the very importance of the environment, the living environment, in how genes are expressed. So nature, nurture, both are at work. Then we have a very useful sensory ability, electric senses, electroreception, which the sharks and rays all have the ability to do. Very useful when your food might be a little creature hiding under the sand who unfortunately gives its presence away by a heartbeat, which can give off a little rhythm of electrical impulses that the shark can detect and find the prey that way. Some fishes have taken electricity to a whole other level. The knife fishes, named for their shape, I guess kutofish, and the elephant-nosed fishes of Africa, these are South American, they produce EODs, electric organ discharges. So they produce their own signature, electric signature. They live in murky water, so vision, once again, is not very useful to them. And they've been shown to change their frequencies. They have a lot of interesting social behaviors involving these pulses, these electrical pulses. So if two individuals are EODing at about the same amount, 400 hertz in this case, and they swim past each other in the murky water, it may get a little confusing, so they shift their EOD frequency so that they're not confused, they know who's who. They probably, in fact, it's been shown they have individual recognition from this. They also, sometimes an individual will stop making a signal when they're in another one's territory. So we could call that an example of deference by a fish, of showing deference to another. Then we have interesting things like how fish use visual systems in covert ways. So these amb and damselfishes look yellow to us, but under ultraviolet light, they also have these facial patterns, a little bit like fingerprints, that are unique to individuals. And it's a way that, this is, by the way, two pictures of the same individual. This one is under visible spectrum light for us. This is under UV light. And under the UV light, you can see this pattern. So they can see this on each other because they're sensitive to this light spectrum. But most of their enemies, the predators who might try to catch them for food, cannot see any of this stuff. So it's a way that they can make themselves conspicuous and individual to each other in a covert way without compromising their camouflage, which helps protect them against enemies, as I suppose it says here. I mentioned recognition. Fishes also do something that a lot of people who've kept fishes in aquariums suspected for a long time. They recognize me. They know it's me. In a crowd, they know it's me. And indeed, they've recently done studies in Germany, I think it was, showing that fishes do recognize faces, individual faces. Even when you take away hair and ears and some other useful cues, they can distinguish similar faces from each other. How do you do that? Well, you train archer fishes, in this case, a fish who squirts water, and I'll say more about that shortly. It's a very useful trait because you can get them to squirt water at 1 or 2 stimuli above the tank. And that's how they register, this is my choice, this is the one that I recognize. So you can train them to recognize a certain face and then present that face with other unfamiliar faces. They always squirt at the familiar one. And you can do variations on that experiment to show that they recognize familiar faces. I think more interesting than that, though, is how fishes will fall for the same optical illusions that we do. This is called the Ebbinghaus illusion, where the 2 orange dots are the same size, but because of the arrangement of the blue dots around them, this one looks larger than this one. And if you train various fish species to choose the larger of 2 circles to get a little food reward, that's how you train them, and then present them with this, they go right up to this one, or they squirt water at that one, or they bump their nose against it, however the method is. And so they are perceiving that as larger than this one, the same way we do, even though they're the same size. Similarly, with the Mueller-Lyer illusion, these red-tailed split fins will choose this line compared to this one. They're the same length, actually, but if they've been trained to choose a longer of 2 lines, they believe that this one is. And I think there's something poignant about that. It suggests that a fish can have beliefs, can believe something. And it also says something about them seeing the world somewhat like the way we see the world. This is called a Canisa triangle. There is no triangle in this image, but there's the impression of 2 triangles, in particular this white one, because of the arrangement of figures. And a bamboo shark, for instance, who is trained to recognize rectangles versus triangles or what have you, will recognize this as a triangle. So they also form the image that's not really there, that's implied by the surrounding shapes. Let's move on to what fishes think in their minds, although what I've been talking about does relate to that. There's been quite a lot of study of fish cognition, fish intelligence, and fish minds. And tool use was once thought to be only humans did it, and then we added great apes, and then elephants, and many, many animals now use tools. It's very widespread, including fishes. They don't have grasping hands, so they're limited in what they can do, but they have mouths, and they can move water around. This tusk fish has picked up this clam, and you can watch YouTube videos of this, and has carried the clam to a particular stone, which with a series of well-timed head flicks and releases is able to smash the clam, the unfortunate mollusk, against the stone to break it open to get the insides. I'm always interested also in the other fish watching this kind of behavior. They're bystanders or by-swimmers looking for an opportunity to get a little bit of the action. Fishes are very alert and aware. Okay, here we are back to the archer fishes of human face recognition studies. They do some remarkable things. I mean, they don't only eat above the water. I mean, they mostly get their food underneath the water. But if an insect flies by, they will squirt water at it to try to knock it out of the air. And you can imagine that takes a great deal of skill. If a beetle or a butterfly is flying by at 6 miles an hour, you better be pretty good at shooting water to catch it. And it's been shown they use two methods. If it's far away from the water, like more than 7 inches, I don't know, 22 centimeters, I'm not sure how much that is, 18, 20 centimeters, good enough. Then they will do a predictive shooting. So the insect is flying here, they squirt the water that way, right? So the water meets when it gets there, if the insect keeps flying in a straight line. But if it's closer, they do a turn and shoot. So if the insect is flying here, they rotate their body and shoot directly at the insect. So 2 very different methods. And then interestingly, they found that apprentices, young ones, it's sort of an apprenticeship, they learn by observation. So if they've had no opportunity to do this themselves, and they can just watch another fish doing it repeatedly, they become much better at doing it when they're given the opportunity to shoot themselves, to shoot water at themselves, not shoot themselves. And so it's observational learning. It's like an apprenticeship. And that's also a way you could describe that as perspective taking, taking the perspective of another. That is considered by scientists to be a quite sophisticated cognitive skill. We marvel at the intelligence of our closest relatives, common chimpanzees, as we should, who, I don't know if you've seen this, but they can remember the arrangement of numbers on a screen that just flash up for 1/5 of a second, so a very brief period before being removed. They can remember the arrangement of those numbers much, much better than we can. In fact, they almost always get it right. If it's just a second, we might get one, up to maybe 3 or 4, if we're very good at it. So they're very good at this spatial memory. It can be debated why they're good at that. But we so rarely think about memory in fishes. In fact, there's this common myth, I don't know if it exists in Europe, but the 3-second memory of the goldfish. I've seen that played out in advertising in airports, for instance. Well, it's just not true. Fishes do have good memories. I've talked about individual recognition and face recognition. That requires memory. But this little 5-inch long fish of the Atlantic seaboard called the frillfin goby has a particularly impressive memory skill that involves memorizing the tide pool zone where they live. They're an intertidal fish, so they live in that area between high tide and low tide that looks a lot like this. And it's been observed over the years that they can jump accurately from one tide pool to another, and if they want, they can actually work their way back out to the open sea. This is a very useful skill if a large bird, a heron, or an octopus, or some other predator comes along and the little fish wants to get out of the way. But how do they do it? How do they know which direction to jump and how far to jump to avoid ending up on the rocks? I don't know what it says here, but maybe I've already given it away. I don't know. I think I have, because it says 40 days later. Yeah, okay. Well, you know how they do it. They swim over it at high tide, so when the waves come in, they can swim down in the nooks and crannies, and they form what we call a mental map, and a mental image of the topography of that tide pool zone. And then when the tide goes out, they have it in their head in another orientation. Before it was looking down, now they're in the water, and they're able to translate the aerial view into horizontal view. I think that's a remarkable cognitive feat. They can do it in just one day, une journée, I think, une journée, and they can remember it for at least 40 days after. So forget about the 3-second memory. These aren't goldfishes, but goldfishes are relatives of these guys. They have a very good memory. This is just a schematic showing how they can jump from one pool to another. A lot more can be said about fish brains, but you need to read the book to get more of that. I want to move on to what fishes feel, to emotions in fishes. Do fishes have emotions? Well, they're vertebrates. They have the same sort of biochemistry we have. They have social lives. As you saw earlier, they have sex lives, even though sometimes they're bizarre. So we may expect that they have feelings, and feelings are very fundamental. Feelings are subject to evolution just as are physical traits. Emotional traits are very much passed along. The feeling of love, for instance, for parents who work together because they love each other to raise their young. Well, that young is going to have the genes that the parents passed on for loving, bonding behavior, for example. I'm going to skip this slide. It's just mainly jargon. Let's go straight to the feeling of pain. Okay, so this is not so much emotions yet. This is more perceptual stuff as well. I probably should rearrange that in the talk. Studies by British biologist Victoria Braithwaite, very detailed studies on trout have shown that they have different types of pain receptors for chemical, heat, and mechanical insults, and they respond, they send the signals to the brain, the fish changes the behavior, the fish remembers that, and I think most convincingly the fish will seek pain relief if given the opportunity. To wit, a study by Lynn Snedden of zebrafishes, I think presents very convincing support for pain. You may wonder why even make the argument. Isn't it obvious that a fish can feel pain, a complex vertebrate? Unfortunately, there are scientists, a few, who still make the claim that fishes don't feel pain. And there are also many fishermen who cling to that belief. They don't want to think that fishes feel pain because it undermines the fun of their sport. So it's a very important subject, and that's why I think it's worth citing some of these studies, even though I would like it if we suddenly decided, I don't think we need to do any more studies on fish pain. The jury should be decided on that one. But let me briefly describe the study which you may have now read. And I'll just very briefly describe it. If you take these fishes and you give them an opportunity to swim in an area of their tank that they would normally avoid, if they've been given an injection of an acid, which probably causes pain, if they can feel pain, they start swimming over there, but only if you put painkiller in there. So they always avoid the brightly lit barren part of the tank unless you put painkiller there. And then the ones who had a painful stimulus, an injection of acid, they swim over there. So they'll pay a cost to get pain relief. I think that's a very convincing model or way to show that an animal is feeling bad, because they will pay a cost to relieve the pain. The ones who've been injected, this is the control group, be injected with a saline solution, which doesn't cause any lasting pain. They don't swim over there. They just stay in the nice part of the tank that's safe and protected and dimly lit. I think probably this kind of describes that. We may debate where we draw the line on sentience. Who feels, who doesn't, who has pain, who doesn't, who has pleasure, doesn't. Make sure you draw the line in pencil, because new evidence is coming to light all the time, and generally it's more inclusive as we get more scientific evidence. Animals who we thought were not sentient, we realize are sentient. Are snails sentient? I don't know. They have sex with each other. There are old studies showing that if somebody puts electrodes into the pleasure centers of their ganglion, their sort of equivalent of a brain, they will self-stimulate. They will try to keep that part hot, active, presumably because it's rewarding and feels good for them. So definitely vertebrates, some vertebrates now, there's growing evidence that you don't have to have a backbone, a spine, you don't have to be a vertebrate to be sentient. Cephalopod crustaceans, the octopuses and squids, of which I saw you have at least one poster over there, I'm glad to see that. They, did I say mollusks? I may have said crustaceans. I meant mollusks if I said crustaceans. They have clearly evolved consciousness separately. They engage in play behavior, they can bear grudges, they have personalities, they can solve problems. Very, very brainy invertebrates. And pretty clearly they can feel pain and probably pleasure as well. Here's a very compelling study in which another study that's a bit troublesome, but somebody's done the study. I'm trying to make a case for fishes. I'm going to describe the study briefly. Striated surgeon fishes were taken from their homes in the Great Barrier Reef, and they were subjected to a stressful procedure where each one was put in a bucket of water, just enough to cover their body for 30 minutes. Probably a very, very scary, very stressful event for these fishes. I don't have to say probably, because you can measure stress by taking a blood sample and measuring cortisol, stress hormone, and it goes up very high. So they were definitely unhappy, upset fishes. And then they gave them the opportunity, some of them had the opportunity to get massaged, to get stroked, when they put them in a tank with a little wand that went back and forth. And they would swim up to that and get stroked on their skin. And that settled them down. Their stress levels came down. If the wand was stationary and didn't go back and forth, they ignored it, and their stress levels stayed high. So that analogous to the pain study of the zebrafish, this shows that a fish who is unhappy, who is feeling emotionally bad, will take steps to relieve the stress, the emotional pain that they're in. I'm happy to say they released all of those fishes back in their homes in the Great Barrier Reef following the study. That's significant because historically scientists have not even told you in the paper what they did with the animals. You're left wondering. Sometimes they say we terminated them or killed them at the end of the study, but usually they don't tell you that they took them back to their homes. So I was encouraged to see that. That's a growing trend in science. Science is also responsive to the growing moral concern that we're seeing now around the world for animals. It's frustratingly slow, but it's changing. Another example of this is a study from Norway, which is one of the main aquaculture countries. Aquaculture, the factory farming of fishes, the fastest growing segment of animal agriculture in the last several decades. They did a study because it's been found that many of these young salmon in aquaculture operations, they die. They fail to flourish. They stop eating. They're about 1/3 the weight of the other ones who are the same age, and they float to the top and they die. And if you measure cortisol, very high. And they concluded that they were severely depressed. And that's a phrase, severely depressed, that I can tell you would not find in scientific journals just 20 years ago. Now we are seeing journals publishing statements like that. And just to the point about their biochemistry, fishes do respond to drugs like antidepressants and anti-anxieties, Valium, etc., Prozac, in ways that are analogous to how we respond. They get relaxed by these drugs. It relaxes them. Let's move on to fish societies, how fishes interact with each other. This is Razor Boy. I like this picture because it says something about fish personality. They are individuals. Really, it shouldn't be that impressive, right, to say they're individuals. Evolution by natural selection would not work if we didn't have variation in populations. That's how evolution works. It has to have different things to choose from, right? So, of course, we have individual variation, and that's expressed in personalities for complex beings like this, like Razor Boy, who was initially very afraid of the photographer, Robert Winter, who took the picture. Am I upsetting your situation? Sorry, I just realized you're having to move your microphone. I'll stay on this side from now on, okay? Unless you say something to annoy me, and then I'll go over there.
That's fine.
Okay. Initially, Razor Boy was shy, but as he got to know this diver, he recognized him, as we know fishes can do now. He would come right up to him, and in fact, it got to the point where Robert had to sort of try to shoo him away so he could take a picture quickly, but otherwise he was too close to the focus of the lens. And you can also see how their eyes move independently in many species, a little bit like chameleon lizards. That's a handy thing to do. But yes, definitely fishes have personalities. They also play. Well, there's evidence that they play. There's a study of just 3 cichlids who were observed independently interacting with this semi-buoyant thermometer in their tank. This wasn't being studied by the scientists, but they noticed, look what they're doing with this thing. They would bump it and knock it, and in unique ways to the individuals, what we'd say idiosyncratic ways. And it fits the criteria for play. I described that in a little more detail in What a Fish Knows. But we now have evidence for fish play. There's a textbook written by one of the scientists who did this. He was on my PhD committee, Gordon Burkhardt, and in which he uses this photograph on the cover of this beautiful book all about play in animals. So fish play is now being recognized. And play is an emotional behavior. It's a pleasurable, buoyant, happy kind of behavior. Once again, not something that most people out there on the street. Go and tell them. Fish play, by the way. Yes, good. Hey, nice to meet you. Did you know that fishes play? Most people are going to be surprised at that. They don't think that. They don't realize that. This stuff is not common knowledge yet. This is new stuff. You guys are going to be ahead of everybody else on fishes. That's the plan. That's the big scheme. And personalities, individual recognition, stress, loneliness, perhaps. Maybe that's what lies behind this behavior, this 9-year-old pufferfish. That's the one on the left. Element gauche. Who would probably get lonely and bored in that little tank all day, and then his guardian would come home and they would have these, she called them staring contests. I think it's like, gee, I'm just happy to see you. And they would interact this way for a while. Unfortunately, pufferfishes are predaceous and they will tend to kill and eat any other being in their tank, so they often are by themselves. I don't write a lot about aquarium fish keeping in my book. It is troublesome, especially the collection of fishes from the wild for aquariums. I'm not advocating it. Nevertheless, people have and continue to keep fishes in aquariums, including very caring individuals who may just not know better, or they think it's okay, whatever. But it's important. It can be instructive. There's a lot of good observations people have about fish behavior from these relationships. I call this flatulent communication. I don't know if that translates. I don't know what the French would be, but there is actually at least one fish who communicates with the gas bubbles released from their anuses, and it's herrings. And apparently this relates to decision-making behavior. And it's a phenomenon that's known in a number of animals who will perform a certain behavior. If it's geese, it may be standing up or honking. In cattle, it may be turning a certain direction or standing up if they've been lying around. Essentially to take a vote. Are we ready to move to another pasture? Are we ready to fly to that lake over there? Are we ready to, is it time to move to the deeper water because it's nighttime, it's safer down there? It appears to be that herrings are making these frequent repetitive ticks, which we make an acronym, it's kind of cute, to convey this information to each other. So it's a form of communication that seems to be, so far, unique to fishes. I did a little cartoon on this. I'll give you just a moment to enjoy the cartoon. What about virtue? Can fishes be virtuous? Can they do good? Can they be good Samaritans? Yes, they can. Rabbit fishes, for example, hunt. They don't hunt, actually. They're mainly algae feeders, and they feed in pairs, one of whom is feeding, the other one playing lookout. This is a very vulnerable position for a fish to be in. Head down in the coral, you can't see that moray eel coming along or a grouper who's hungry and wants you for dinner. You're vulnerable. So isn't it nice if you can have another one of your compatriots looking out for you? And so this one's playing lookout, not eating, waiting his or her turn, and then when this one's had enough, or after a couple of minutes, knows that they should take a break, comes up, does lookout, and this one goes down. So these are 4 different species of rabbitfish, so it's widespread in this species. I suspect we'll be finding many, many other examples of this in years to come, and there's certainly other virtuous behavior that fishes engage in. Perhaps an example being this one, interspecies communication. This grouper fish, big chunky predatory fish of the reef, is hungry and thinks, well, let's recruit a partner to hunt with me. Not another grouper, but a moray eel. This is a moray eel. It's not a very good photo, and you can watch videos on YouTube of this behavior. It's also been studied in captivity. This grouper, just after this photo was taken, does a head shake, swims right past the moray and does a head shake. Probably knows this particular moray eel. They probably know each other. And essentially the head shake is an invitation. Will you come foraging with me, hunting with me? Let's go together. And if the moray eel is also hungry, they swim off together. It looks like a Disney movie scene. And hunting together, it's been shown that their per capita success rate is higher for each of them if they hunt together than if they hunt individually. Probably because this one can chase a little fish into the reef where it may catch it, but if the little fish finds an escape route, well, the grouper is waiting outside to pounce there. So they do better when they hunt together. It's interspecies referential signaling also. When this one does a head shake or a full body shimmy, that is to one different species, and it's a symbolic communication. It's conveying a request that's separate in space and time. The hunting is going to take place somewhere else, and it's going to take place a little bit later. That, too, is considered by scientists to be very sophisticated. Very rare in nature that species do referential signaling, and even more rare that they do it across species lines. So, part of the message here is not to try and say fishes are really cool, look how they do neat things. It's really to say that fishes are on an even plane with all the other vertebrates. We shouldn't be thinking them as a little bit lower or primitive, which is the kind of language, in English at least, we've used to describe them. I'm convinced that they are deserving of equal moral consideration to all other vertebrates, based on what they do, based on the complexity of their lives, based on their emotions, based on their minds, based on their social behavior. Courtship is quite widespread in fishes. They have to mate, and usually it's males who are trying to woo females, get them in the mood, impress them. In this case, we have Bard Hamlet, a male swimming around a female. And tomorrow he might be a female and she might be a male. About 1/4 of all reef fishes are known to be able to change sex. I think I mentioned here, all without expensive surgery. And it's a very useful skill or useful ability when you want to improve your reproductive strategy, your reproductive success. The film Finding Nemo, I was going to call my book Minding Nemo, it got changed. But the film Finding Nemo, you may have seen it. Hands up if you've seen the film Finding Nemo. Okay, quite a lot of people. You may recall that Nemo's father, I believe Marlin is the name. In nature, Marlin would become his mother, because when his mother disappeared, the top male, his dad, would become the top female, changes sex to female. In that species, the clownfish, they can't reverse. You can't go back to male again. You're stuck with being a female. That's okay. And then the next male moves up to be the top male. So it's like a chain of command with a row of males, and then the top one is the female. So it's very much a pro-feminist society. I'm all for that. Courtship takes other expressions. There was a diver in Japan some years ago, just a few years ago, who found these 6-foot wide, beautiful circle patterns in the sand. Wondered what it was. It was a 4-inch long pufferfish, previously unknown to science, now described. And he came back with a camera and filmed this. And this is a male who spends hours, perhaps days, making these beautiful structures to, obviously you can probably guess, try to impress a female. A little bit like, it's a sexually selected trait. It's probably through generations of choosy particular females who value aesthetic artistry, who have led to males going to this amount of trouble. By the way, there's the male right there, just for scale. He's just there. To spend all this energy to make this impressive arena where they will mate and lay eggs, and then they will drop bits of shell and pebbles to try to disguise the eggs. I don't know why it works. For me, it looks like this is a big advertisement to predators, to egg feeders. It's like, here are the eggs, come and get them. It's like breakfast time, but obviously it works because it's evolved. But I think it's really artistry. I think it's fair to regard this as artistry in the animal kingdom. No two of these are the same. I do describe in the book other types of structures and mating platforms that fishes make, a little bit like the Australian bowerbirds who make these big structures to attract a mate. They don't even use it as a nest. It's just simply something to impress the member of the other sex. We have certainly many examples in human behavior. Parental care is fairly widespread in fishes, including the mouth brooders who have the brilliant strategy of taking the fishes in their mouths to protect them when there's danger, and then they let them out again. Males are usually the caregivers in fishes, and it's been shown that males in many of these mouth-brooding fishes have larger mouth cavities than do females of the same species. I've written a couple of books about pleasure. I think Sebastian mentioned those in the introduction, and I'd like to mention a little bit about this subject with fishes, because again, it's something most people don't think about, pleasure in fishes, and yet we should. And I think the best examples come from this very complex social relationship and symbiosis called cleaner-client relationships. So the cleaners are these little fishes who advertise that they're open for business, that they're going to remove parasites and algae and such from so-called client fishes of various species, well over 100 described species, who wait their turn to swim into the client's cleaning area and then have themselves serviced by these cleaners who, the clients cooperate, they open their mouths, cleaners swim in, they go in and out of the gills, plucking off little fish lice and other things like that are unwanted. And it's a business relationship. It's built on trust. The cleaners know the clients return repeatedly to the same cleaners. There's no record of the client ever eating the cleaner. It's not a good way to maintain good business relationships, to eat your business partner. And so it's built on trust, and it's Machiavellian, meaning it sometimes gets a little complicated. Cleaners don't always do as good a job as on other days, and it's been shown that if there's very few clients waiting to be serviced, cleaners do a worse job. They do a better job if there's a lot of clients waiting, probably because you have a reputation at stake. You want to maintain your good reputation, whereas if there's no one waiting, you don't have much to lose. So you might mucus nip. This is a behavior where the cleaner actually takes a little bite of the slimy layer on the outside. Turns out that's very nutritious, and apparently the cleaners really like that. But clients don't like that. It's not good for them. They do a body jolt when they get mucus nipped. Other clients may notice that, and it may be a signal, don't go to these cleaners, they're not doing a good job. Hence the reputation. It's a little bit like eBay ratings, where based on your sales history, you have a good or not so good reputation, and it can go up and down. The term that scientists have used in the many studies they've done of this is image scoring. So the clients are keeping an image score of the cleaners based on their behavior. Cleaners, to try and inflate their reputation, will take breaks from plucking parasites, and they will gratuitously flutter their fins on the clients to give them a little massage. That relates very much to the earlier study on the surgeonfish stress that I mentioned, when they swam up to those little models, the wands, to get stroked. Those wands were painted to look just like cleaner fishes. So the surgeon fishes probably recognize them as, oh, I know who these are. They can make me feel comfortable again. So I keep telling myself when I do this, I need to change the order of those slides so that there's context before I talk about that earlier study. But anyway, I hope that made some sense. I don't know what that says, but I think it's some of what I've just been talking about, and I won't have you read it. And it's probably because of these cleaner-client relations and the pleasure of being caressed that some fishes will swim up to trusted divers to get stroked and caresses. There's no parasite removal service that this Nassau grouper is getting from this diver who sent me this photograph. She's seen this fish many times. His name is Larry. And he's probably in an area where there's no fishing or spearfishing allowed. And studies have shown that fishes who live in areas where there's no persecution, they will let swimmers get much closer to them than in areas where they are persecuted. It does affect them and their behavior and their trust. I spoke at a vet school last year in Kansas, and one of the students said, oh yeah, my dad and I go snorkeling every year down in the Bahamas, and there's a grouper there who we hang out with and we do photos, and he loves to get stroked. She said, I'll send you some pictures. So here's some pictures of them hanging out together. Here's her dad with his regulator under the open gills. The fish has opened his or her gill covers to let the bubbles wash over the gills, and presumably feels nice, a tickling feeling. So a wild animal who will swim up to trusted humans for pleasure. As will sharks. A growing number of specially equipped and very courageous divers will swim with sharks. Sharks have been completely mismeasured by us. They're not ravenous killers trying to get us and eat us. Sharks don't eat humans. Humans to sharks taste probably kind of like Brussels sprouts. I happen to like Brussels sprouts, but you know what I mean. I think we have a very bad taste. And bites or so-called attacks are very rare events, probably mistaken identity in most cases. In any event, these sharks will swim up to these divers, probably they know who they are, and they will get stroked, and it sends them into a super relaxed state. And divers will then often use that opportunity to remove hooks from their mouths, such as this blue shark. A few minutes after this photo was taken by Teresa Guys, one of her colleagues had bolt cutters and clipped through that hook, which had probably been in there for weeks, causing pain and discomfort, and removed that hook from the shark's face. And the shark stayed around for many minutes afterwards. Gratitude, it's been shown in whales, and it's quite possible these large-brained, long-lived animals are able to feel gratitude and may know that these particular divers will help them. I think it probably takes some courage on the part of a shark to swim among divers, humans. They probably don't have a very good reputation among sharks, those who know about them. And it feels good to us, too, to do a good deed. So we often repay the service and thank them for that. Just want to finish up with a little bit about the bigger picture then, about our relationship with fishes. As you know, based on the posters here and the messages, it's a very troubled relationship. We haven't had a good relationship with fishes, and sentience is a very important word. Sebastian mentioned the journal I co-edit called Animal Sentience. It's an open journal. Anyone can access it anytime. And it's the first journal of animal feeling that's ever been published. So hopefully there'll be many more. We have an excellent chief editor. He happens to be a vegan. He's originally from Hungary. Stephen Harnad, brilliant man. And he's really the engine that drives this journal. We've already had more than 100 articles published in the journal. So it's a very active journal, and it's exciting to see scientists taking a greater interest in how animals feel. And we need to have feelings about animals, because we've been shutting off our feelings for a long time, resulting in this kind of thing, where it's estimated that we may be killing over 2 trillion fishes every year. If you line them up end to end, they would reach the sun and back. And it's so easy to forget that every one is a unique individual who has or had a personality and a life that they valued. And it's terribly wasteful, commercial fishing. This is a shrimp fishing vessel from Mozambique. And you have to look very hard in here to find any shrimp. There's a couple, but most of these are undesired, untargeted fish, which are labeled bycatch. Most of them are dumped back into the sea, dead or dying, to the tune of, it's actually, 100, yes, thank you. I was going to say it's 200 million, but you've changed it to kilos, thank you. about 100 million kilos of bycatch are tossed back in the ocean every year. That number is declining only because there are efforts to actually use that, but it's still unwanted, it's still death, it's still rapacious loss of life in the oceans. And it's not a very human-friendly industry either, commercial fishing. It's particularly in Asia. There's a slave trade going on where young people are not paid, they're stuck on the boats, they're treated poorly, they're overworked. Many of them are underage, as I say, and it's essentially slavery in the realm of commercial fishing. Aquaculture operations, a number of problems. The conditions for the fishes, I mentioned the earlier salmon study, where depression can happen for these animals. They get highly stressed, they're in crowded conditions, it's competitive for food, they're often made hungry, and then when the food appears, it's for a short time, and there's a real rush on the food. They don't get to behave the way they would in the wild. These fishes move from one place to another. They migrate. They want freedom. Freedom is valuable to them, and it's thwarted in these situations. Of course, there's a lot of ecological issues that are concerns as well, because these are typically fish meshes and nets. They may contain the fishes, but they don't contain the pesticides that are used because of the crowded populations, and the antibiotics causes disease and illness and pests. So there's chemicals that leach out through into the surrounding environments. Inevitably, there are tears in the meshes, and some of these fishes escape. They have different genetic structure to the wild ones. So there's the concern about the dilution of wild populations and how that may affect them. If they escape, they have no idea how to survive in the wild. They don't know how to feed themselves. They will often feed on plastic and other things that are inappropriate, and that will kill them as well. So the quality of life for them inside, or if they escape, is usually not good. You've heard of shark finning, a terrible problem. There's efforts to educate and change the things in China, and that is having some success. A lot of sharks are killed for meat as well, so it goes beyond finning. But at least there's a growing awareness. It's an example of an area where we've exploited fishes that is beginning to turn around, and we may hope that will continue and that this awful practice will end. And back to the bycatch. I mean, where all the marine life we take out, it's estimated we've lost half of all the marine life since 1970. And if you know anything about the history of commercial fishing, and with commercial extinctions that go back to the 19th century, we'd already lost a great deal before that time. So we've been doing very badly with the oceans. And there's a whole range of problems plaguing the oceans. Global warming, climate change, leading to acidification, leading in terms to coral bleaching, the problem of microplastics, in particular the microbeads that are a product of plastic manufacture. They look just like fish eggs, and a lot of baby fishes use them for food, feed on fish eggs. They can't tell that these are plastics, and they ingest them, and they compact their stomach, and they rupture their stomachs, and they die from that, large numbers of that. And then just fishing gear, of which an estimated 680,000 tons of lost or discarded fishing equipment, nets, lines, are left in the oceans every year. They continue to wreak havoc after we think that they're no longer useful. So that's another ancillary problem with commercial fishing. And you may or may not know, the oceans are the primary producer of oxygen. The blue-green algae in the oceans, which cover, as you know, 3/4 of the Earth's surface, create a lot of the healthy air that we rely on to breathe, terrestrial animals. So really, where the oceans go, so go we. We need to look after them better than we have been doing. This is a beautiful graphic, a very telling graphic from NASA, showing just how little water there is on Earth. This is the total amount of water on Earth if you take it all and put it into a sphere. Even though 3/4 of the Earth's surface is covered, let's face it, it's only a small thin layer of the surface of the Earth that has water on it. And most of that water, about 90%, is either salt water or it's frozen. It's not available for consumption by terrestrial animals. If you take just 1% of this, it's going to be a tiny drop. It would be nice if they had that there. So it just says something about the vulnerability and the importance of healthy marine and aquatic habitats. And we are a fickle species. We are very adept at categorizing and classifying animals who are, in all the important ways, the capacity to feel pain or pleasure, essentially equals. These are essentially equals. The physical likeness here is to illustrate the point, but in our part of the world, this is animals typically seen as a source of food. There are other parts of the world where the cows are revered as sacred animals and protected that way, although not always well. And then these are beloved pets here, and they're a source of food in some other places. So depending on where you are in the world, we have a very different view of animals. We really need to view them in a more egalitarian way, where we have basic rights, fundamental rights, as we generally agree that humans should have. Not that we always behave that way, but we do recognize we should have those rights, and we haven't been giving them to other animals with hearts and minds and different numbers of legs or fins. Fishes are particularly disadvantaged because they have evolved and they live figuratively and literally below the surface of our consciousness. They live in another realm, and so they've been out of view until recently. Now we have diving gear and underwater photography that it allows us to see them in ways that we hadn't before. That's great. And we have YouTube where you can go and see the results of that. But also evolving in water, they don't blink. They don't need to because their eyes are constantly bathed in water. They do make sounds, many sounds. Some fishes are named for the sounds they make. But we don't generally hear them. The sounds they try to make when we pull them into the air is about as useful as us screaming underwater. We don't really hear what's being said. It's not effective. So, but we can look into their lives, as I've given you some glimpses tonight, and see that they do actually have rich, complex lives. They have capacities that endow them with the basics for ascribing basic rights to them and protections. And I want to just finish with a story of an individual fish named Jasper, a discus, a popular aquarium fish. They're a tropical fish. They're found in parts of the Southeast Asia, I believe. And Jasper lived alone in a tank, and probably like the pufferfish you saw earlier, he would get lonely. And when Karen would come home from work every day, they would play a little game of chase in the tank. She would run back and forth, and Jasper would swim like this with her. Probably he was happy to see her. They have emotions. He was probably excited. And then she would cup her hands and put them in the water and let the water flow into her hands. And Jasper would swim onto his side and swim into her hands and just nestle there, and she was able to stroke him with her thumb. Once again, a massage for a fish, a caress, probably made him feel better, made him feel good. And can you imagine a relationship like that without emotional attachment? I mean, she was very attached to him. She felt the loss when he died. And it's that kind of recognition as fishes as individuals that I think we need to have. We need to realize they are not just things, living things, but beings with lives. As the recently sadly departed philosopher Tom Reagan said, animal creatures not just with a biology, but with a biography, with a life that matters for them. And I think if we move towards that, we move towards a relationship that I think is conveyed by these words from the America's sort of Jane Goodall of the ocean, Sylvia Earle, who converts that knowledge into her own behavior. Not eating fishes is something that is probably the best thing we can do to them, because all of these rapacious things we do to fishes, almost all of it is to put them on the plate or to amuse ourselves in entertainment. But those two are very much intertwined. And I just want to finish by, I don't think it's written here, but karma. The concept of karma is a beautiful concept. What goes around comes around. What's good for one is good for the other. When we do a good deed, we feel good about ourselves, and that makes us better and happier and healthier. And I think if we do better by fishes, if we respect them and love them and treat them well, it's a better society. We will be better to each other. It's all connected. And so I urge you to be fish ambassadors, to go out into the world and tell people that fishes have biographies and not just biologies. Obviously not lecture them like I am, but in a very gentle and loving way, to share what we now know about fishes. That's certainly the main reason why I wrote this book, and why I feel privileged to go out and speak to people, even people like you who probably already agree with much of what I say. But it's very important to articulate this and get this information into the consciousness of humankind. these are ways of contacting me. Feel free to do so. If you want to get my newsletter, I send it out monthly. You just email me or go to my website there. And thank you for what you do, and thank you for listening to me tonight, and I'll be happy to take questions. Les questions? En anglais, s'il vous plaît.
Sébastien pourra traduire.
Tu passes le micro du coup
Il doit marcher dans le... Sinon, quelqu'un veut poser une question.
Maybe it's because they have to ask in English. Oh no, you ask in French and you translate?
Yeah.
Okay.
May I ask you to speak about the tuna fish? Because I saw on YouTube a video that they have strategies like dolphins, and they hunt extremely intelligently. I would like to know, because everybody kills tuna fish like a mineral resource, and I would like to have your opinion on it.
Thank you for mentioning tunas, and it makes me realize I don't even mention them at all in my talk. I probably should incorporate them because they are such a iconic fish, and we talk about them. People know the word, but it's almost always in the context of putting them on a sandwich, and it comes in these little cans, which is so pathetic because it's one of the most majestic. They really are like tigers of the seas. They're big and strong and muscular and intelligent, and they hunt cooperatively. I've seen large fishes hunt in like phalanxes where they form a row and they chase fishes towards the shore where they have limited options to escape. I don't know if tunas do that, but there is, as you say, it's now being observed that tunas will hunt cooperatively and they work together in strategic ways, many of which we probably don't even realize they're doing yet. So we should have a lot more respect for them. And most people who know the word tuna probably have no idea. They may think it's a little fish. Not that there's anything wrong with being small, but the fact that it is this, some of the bigger tunas are magnificent, huge fish. By the way, so valuable and rare now are some of the most endangered. I think the Atlantic bluefin, or maybe the Pacific bluefin, I forget which one it is, that they're priced, the price of one tuna is greater than the equivalent weight in silver. So they're like just thousands and thousands of, tens of thousands of dollars for just one fish. And that's awful because as they get rare, they become more valuable in that commercial sense, which means they're more sought after, which contributes to their further decline.
So maybe I would translate.
Oh, okay, sure. Thank you. That's a lot of work.
Donc la question à la base c'était, on a demandé à Jonathan au sujet des thons, puisque le monsieur ici présent a vu manifestement un documentaire où les thons chassaient en coopération. Et donc Jonathan Balcombe a expliqué qu'effectivement il regrettait un peu de ne pas suffisamment parler de thons lors de cette présentation, et que en général quand on entendait parler de thon c'était souvent dans l'assiette et qu'on avait une image assez fausse des thons, qu'on n'imaginait pas que c'était des poissons absolument énormes, ce qui est le cas. Ce sont pour reprendre l'image qu'il a utilisée, ce sont un peu les tigres des océans, ce sont des poissons énormes, et qu'effectivement ils ont des comportements assez complexes, qu'il a mentionné des observations qui ont été faites de thons qui chassaient en ligne et qui poussaient les poissons vers les côtes de manière à ce qu'ensuite les poissons n'aient plus d'échappatoire, ils soient dans une impasse. Et il les attaque à ce moment-là. Et il mentionnait également que ce sont des poissons qui ont une très forte prédation humaine dessus, et qu'il y a des espèces qui sont en train de disparaître assez fortement, et du fait de leur disparition deviennent extrêmement chers à la vente, et on se retrouve avec des poissons dont le poids vaut l'équivalent en argent à la sortie. Il y a deux micros, je pense.
Donc, il y avait le monsieur là, avant, vous passerez le micro en dessous. Si vous pouvez poser la question aussi en français.
Ok, alors d'abord en français, peut-être en anglais. Ces dernières décennies, les biologistes ont montré que beaucoup d'animaux terrestres pouvaient ressentir de l'empathie. Est-ce que c'est aussi le cas pour les poissons? In the last decades, biology has shown that a lot of terrestrial animals can feel empathy. Is it the case with the fishes?
Great question. I'm trying to remember if I include empathy in my book. The complexity of social behavior in fishes, to me, predicts that we should find examples of empathy. None is coming to mind. I should probably look that up and see if there's anything out there. So I can't give you a specific, definitive answer, but my prediction is that in the years ahead, scientists will discover empathy that's already taking place.
Donc Jonathan a répondu qu'il a un doute si c'est dans le livre ou pas, et à sa connaissance, pour l'instant, on n'a pas de travaux sur le sujet. Je m'ajoute à ça, parce que j'ai aussi fait des recherches sur le sujet, et à ma connaissance, il n'y a pas d'études pour l'instant sur le sujet, mais sa prédiction, c'est que dans les années qui arrivent, on aura probablement des indications qui vont dans ce sens-là, parce qu'ils ont des vies sociales très complexes, et que ça ne serait absolument pas étonnant. Mais j'ajoute juste, ça c'est moi qui le rajoute, c'est qu'on a beaucoup de difficultés aussi à regarder ce qui se passe dans leur environnement, parce que leur environnement est très différent du nôtre. Et comme le disait Jonathan tout à l'heure, on commence tout juste à réussir à avoir le matériel pour pouvoir les observer dans leur milieu sans avoir une trop grosse influence, parce que dès que c'est fait en captivité, forcément ça va tronquer un peu les résultats. Donc pour l'instant, on n'a pas de, à ma connaissance, et a priori à celle de Jonathan Balcombe non plus, on n'a pas d'études vraiment qui traitent là-dessus, mais on peut espérer que ça ne serait tardé.
I have a question about aquaculture. You mentioned it briefly. I remember a few years ago I read an article about salmon farming and how that, in general perception, public perception, aquaculture is seen as something good. Yeah. And the article I read, again, it was a few years ago, said that actually the impact of farming salmon on the wild salmon is enormous, so that the wild salmon is getting more and more sick, and that it's like you said, that the diseases that the wild fish is not immune to. I would like to ask you about, just to say a bit more about since the aquaculture industry is growing, like you said,
yes.
What is the impact actually on the natural wild fish?
Thank you for asking that. Yeah, something I didn't mention, and you've made the point very well about how aquaculture, because it provides a perfect environment for pathogens to flourish and parasites to flourish, which in those concentrated populations, which then can leach out to the wild populations, affecting them with diseases and parasites. There's that level. There's also the common perception that one of the good things about aquaculture is that it takes the pressure off wild fish populations, because we're farming them. We're not harming the ones in the wild. Whereas there's the harm we just mentioned, but there's another insidious harm that's often overlooked. Most of the fishes that humans like to eat are predatory fishes. Salmon, trout are good examples, tilapia. They're pretty high on the fish food chain. It would be a little bit like on land we were eating tigers and lions and wolves, which we generally don't do, although we persecute those species in other ways. But the fact is, because they're predatory fish, the farmed salmon are generally fed fish meal. They're fed other fishes which are smaller, menhaden, which we don't eat directly, but we kill huge numbers of them every year. Herrings, other smaller fishes who are called feed fish. They're dried out, their meal made into fish meal or fish oil, fed to pets, people's companion animals, but also fed to these fishes in fish farms. So ironically, even though the fishes are being farmed, they're being fed wild fish. So the pressure on a lot of wild fish populations remains high to sustain the farmed fishing. There are research efforts underway, apparently, to try to replace wild fish with some other kinds of maybe even plant-based food. For many people here that may not be important because you maybe just don't want to eat fish, but that might be a step in the right direction. But right now the pressure is on these fishes because they're fed to these captive farmed salmon and other species. Did that answer your question okay? Okay.
Donc la question à l'origine était sur l'aquaculture, sur déjà d'en dire un petit peu plus sur la pollution qui était provoquée par l'aquaculture et sur la bonne image qu'avait un peu l'aquaculture dans le public. Et donc Jonathan a répondu qu'effectivement, il avait mentionné rapidement sans trop s'étendre que Il y a beaucoup de problèmes déjà sanitaires dans ces fermes aquacoles qui ensuite débordent dans les océans, puisqu'on se retrouve avec pas mal de problèmes de santé qui atteignent ensuite les animaux sauvages, notamment avec les saumons, il y a beaucoup de cas. Et ensuite, il appuyait sur le fait que la bonne image de l'aquaculture vient aussi du fait qu'on perçoit l'aquaculture comme étant, on va dire, une façon de diminuer l'effort de pêche sur les populations sauvages. Sauf que les poissons que l'on élève dans l'aquaculture sont des poissons qui sont en haut de la chaîne alimentaire des poissons. C'est des thons, c'est des saumons, c'est, pour reprendre l'image de Jonathan, c'est exactement comme si on élevait des tigres, des lions et des loups pour les nourrir. Donc en fait, on pêche d'autres poissons. Par exemple, il y a des poissons qu'on connaît très peu, qui s'appellent les Manhattan, qui sont des poissons en fait que nous ne consommons pas, mais qui sont utilisés dans plein de pratiques de tous les jours en fait, et qui servent à nourrir ça, les harengs également, qui servent à nourrir ces poissons-là. Donc finalement, on ne baisse pas du tout la pression de pêche sur la population sauvage, on la maintient également pour pouvoir nourrir ces poissons-là. Et a priori, il existe des recherches qui commencent à avoir lieu pour essayer de remplacer ces espèces par d'autres espèces qui auront un impact un peu moins fort.
D'autres questions? En français d'abord, s'il vous plaît.
J'aurais voulu vous entendre parler de la sentience et du comportement des humains, même quand ils savent que les poissons pensent, notamment parce qu'ils ont des expériences, parce qu'on nage avec les poissons, mais que néanmoins on dissocie les choses. Je vais parler des dauphins qui ne sont pas les poissons évidemment, mais qu'on associe au monde marin. Les gens vont dans des cirques pour voir les dauphins jouer, et ils savent qu'ils sont joueurs. So I wanted you to speak a bit about the reasons why, anyways, even when we know that fish or any other animal has sentience, is sentient, we still exploit them and eat them and kill them and hunt them. We bring kids to watch the dolphins. I know they're not fish, but still, there is still this common behavior, even when we admit there is sentience there.
Yeah, important question. I think it's a lot of it's inertia, cultural inertia. It's how we've always done it. You know, we've eaten fish for time immemorial, and I don't so much point my finger at communities that are coastal and have depended on fishes in their diet and have a somewhat sustainable relationship to them. You know, maybe in time we'll address that, but right now most of the people who eat fish don't have contact with them. They don't really have any direct contact with them. It's a choice that they make, and that's of course a key word, right? We have a choice in who we eat. So I think cultural inertia is part of it, and then there's just plain ignorance. I mean, most people don't even know the word sentience. They don't even know what that means. Now, do they know the word pain? Yes, they know what that is, and pleasure. Those words have meaning, so I think it's good to use those words as well. So I think a lot of it is just is awareness. Knowledge is very powerful. It fuels revolutions. You know, an idea whose time has come is not going to go away, and it's going to build. And I give examples. I didn't give them in this talk. I give another talk in which I talk about the end of colonialism, the end of the institutionalized slavery. You know, there are still examples of slavery, but institutionalized slavery is a thing of the past. The success of the civil rights movement, votes for women. These all happened in relatively recent history, and although in the course of a human lifetime it seems frustratingly slow, decades, maybe even a century, in geological time and over the course of generations, that's a very rapid change. So an idea whose time has come can really gain momentum and can switch very quickly. And I think we're beginning to see that sort of momentum building on what I regard as the next great social movement, the movement to emancipate animals from human exploitation, or to give them a level of respect and legal standing that they've never had. So whether that'll happen in my lifetime or yours remains to be seen. But I do take some heart from the fact that cultural change can be very swift, and it can reach a tipping point, a threshold, and then boom, it rapidly turns over. We have to change, sorry, it's a lot, you translate. We have to change our eating habits. We absolutely have to. We're not going to be having this conversation much longer because the planet is just beginning to implode. Now, we have to eat lower on the food chain. And 10 years ago, you would not read anywhere in the news linking animal consumption with the environment. And now, finally, that's happening all over the place. People recognize that eating high on the food chain is not sustainable for the planet. And if people only take a selfish view of it, then that's a reason by itself that we have to change. And combine that with the technological advances with in vitro meat, with ways of eating even animal tissue, never mind plant-based meats, which are really rapidly growing and changing. The change in consumption of milk to plant milks, the U.S. milk industry, dairy milk industry lost $1 billion last year. So it's going down slowly but steadily. So these cultural changes are happening all over the place, and certainly in Europe we're seeing remarkable changes. Sorry, Sebastian, that's a lot to handle. Take it away.
Il a dit qu'il savait pas. Ok, donc tout d'abord à cette question, Jonathan a répondu qu'il pensait qu'il y avait une grosse partie qui était due à l'inertie culturelle, également à l'ignorance un petit peu des gens, puisque même si nous on commençait à en parler, c'est peu connu, que les termes comme sentience étaient peu connus. Il a ensuite expliqué qu'il ne faisait pas que cette conférence, mais qu'il fait une autre présentation sur la fin du colonialisme et certains combats de justice sociale, et que ce sont des combats qui ont mis longtemps à se développer, et puis qu'il a fallu un certain seuil critique pour que ces mouvements-là aient un switch, un changement assez rapide et brutal. Et il pense qu'on commence à vivre cette situation-là aussi là-dessus, que le fait de s'intéresser à la relation qu'on a avec les autres animaux est justement le prochain grand combat de justice sociale, et qu'il y a encore 5, 10, 15 ans, on voyait très peu de commentaires sur la protection animale, sur le fait de s'y intéresser, de remettre en question notre relation avec ces espèces, et que de plus en plus, maintenant, on en voit, donc aux États-Unis, ils le voient beaucoup, et effectivement, nous aussi en Europe, on commence à le voir, et qu'on serait peut-être pas... Enfin, il ne s'avance pas au cours de son existence ou de l'existence des gens ici, mais il pense qu'on est en train d'arriver sur l'aube du moment où ce switch va se produire, notamment avec déjà l'apparition des simili-carnets végétaux qui existent, mais aussi avec la création progressive des viandes in vitro et de tous ces éléments-là qui vont permettre dans la société d'avoir vraiment ce tournant qui va basculer et changer notre relation aux autres espèces.
Incroyable. Unless he's talking about what he had for lunch today.
Je voudrais intervenir moi aussi. C'est pour dire, donc, on tue un nombre incroyable d'animaux aquatiques. Jonathan Balcombe a parlé de 1000 milliards de poissons, mais c'est peut-être 3 fois plus, peut-être même plus, sans parler d'innombrables milliers de milliards de crustacés. Et ça, dans l'indifférence générale, c'est complètement invisibilisé. Et j'ai le sentiment que les animaux aquatiques sont victimes d'une forme spécifique de spécisme, d'une autre forme de spécisme que les animaux terrestres. Les animaux terrestres apparaissent d'une certaine façon quand même comme existants, comme des partenaires qu'on peut mépriser, dominer, asservir. Et j'ai l'impression que les animaux aquatiques, quelque part, n'existent pas. C'est des fruits de mer. Ils se voient absolument nier toute vie subjective, etc. C'est un phénomène culturel massif qui est, je pense, dans énormément de cultures. Et je voudrais savoir si Jonathan Balcombe a un peu des pistes pour faire basculer la culture générale de nos sociétés sur cette question aquatique, pour qu'elle émerge justement, c'est-à-dire pour que ces animaux-là deviennent existants dans notre imaginaire. Désolé, Sébastien.
On va pas s'excuser tout le temps.
So he's saying that. You're saying,
I think everybody speaks French.
Okay.
Basically.
Right.
So with billions of fishes being killed all the time, the thing that he thinks that there are many different there are 2 different kinds of speciesism in fishes and land animals, and that he thinks that land animals can still be seen as partners, and we can have a relationship even despising them or enslaving them, and that fish don't even have that level of recognition because we don't even consider them existing at all. And he's asking if you have any clues or any idea on how to change the cultural view about it.
Thank you, Eva, for that question. I think it's true. I agree. It's almost like another kind of speciesism that we have towards fishes. They're really disadvantaged, and we dismiss them. We think of them as the lowest echelon. I think you'd agree. We have to start somewhere. you guys are clearly starting. You guys are doing already campaigning. That's great to see. There's a group called Fish Feel in North America. There are other parts of efforts in Europe that are beginning to come to help to protect fishes. Sea Shepherd Conservation Society deserves credit for working on marine issues, including fishes, for a long time. So they've been pioneers in that area. I think the key here is, once again, is information. The fishes are great advocates for themselves, but we have to be their messengers in the sense that they can't tell us directly. We can look at how they live and realize that they live fascinating lives and that they're just as complex as the animals on land. So I think our job is to be ambassadors for them, is to make the information available as you're doing, as I'm trying to do. And the only way we're going to have social change in our relationship to them, maybe not the only way, but a critical way, is by having understanding of them. I think another way is realizing that if we don't change our patterns, our behaviors, that our world is going to really suffer, and that means we're going to suffer as well. So there's a selfish element as well. But I think making the information available is a critical step, and connecting it to lifestyle choices, because eating, 98% of all the animals that we harm and kill on Earth are killed and harmed to be eaten. So if we can change eating habits, we of course are benefiting all creatures, fishes included.
Donc la réponse à cette question, c'est que donc dans les pistes pour pouvoir essayer d'améliorer, donc lui il est d'accord avec la position de Div qu'on dirait effectivement qu'il y a deux formes de spécisme différentes, que pour lui les solutions, c'est apporter de l'information. Il faisait remarquer justement qu'aux États-Unis il y a un groupe qui s'appelle Fish Feel, l'émotion des poissons, qui est tenu par Marie Finelli, qui fait un boulot fantastique d'ailleurs, qui commence à travailler là-dessus, qui a Sea Shepherd, qui travaille sur la question aquatique depuis très longtemps. Et lui estime que les poissons sont de très bons avocats pour eux-mêmes, mais il faut encore qu'ils ne peuvent pas eux-mêmes transmettre à tout le reste du monde terrestre, on va dire, la richesse de leur vie, de leurs existences, et donc la solution, en tout cas à son sens, est de transmettre cette information, comme il le disait en montrant les pancartes sur les côtés, c'est-à-dire essayer d'en apprendre le plus possible et de transmettre aux autres un maximum cette connaissance, surtout qu'en plus les poissons sont de très très loin les animaux les plus consommés par les humains, ce qui représente 99%, quelque chose comme ça, des animaux consommés. Et donc voilà, la solution serait d'essayer d'en parler le plus possible, de se renseigner dessus et de transmettre les connaissances qu'on a actuellement sur les poissons et qui fleurissent encore plus aujourd'hui qu'il y a encore une dizaine d'années.
Est-ce qu'il y en a qui voulait parler?
Tu peux le faire en français, en anglais.
Alors moi j'ai une question concernant l'étude des poissons. Dans quelle mesure est-ce que c'est possible ou est-ce que c'est facile d'étudier les poissons de manière éthique pour pouvoir apprendre justement plus sur eux? So, how is it easy or difficult to learn more about fishes, study fishes, but doing that ethically?
That's an important change that we're beginning to see in science. There's a long way to go, but some scientists are now showing ethical concern for their animals in ways that just a generation ago they were not. And I think we should celebrate the ones who are trying to do that. And one of the ways to do that is to provide journals to encourage them to publish in, such as our journal. And by the way, we have guidelines for authors where we encourage them not to harm animals. In fact, we typically will not publish articles that deliberately harmed animals in the science. And a lot of ethology, my field, is observation. It may involve manipulation, but essentially it's watching how animals behave. And if they're in their wild habitats and not captive, it's more challenging to do the study, but you're getting authentic behavior. So there's benefits to science by being more ethical in how we study animals.
Donc la réponse c'est que on est en train de vivre un changement dans le monde scientifique justement, puisque maintenant de plus en plus de chercheurs font attention à cette dimension éthique lorsqu'ils font des recherches. C'est vrai que c'est assez rare, puisque tout à l'heure quand on parlait de l'expérience sur les poissons chirurgiens où ils expliquaient qu'ils les avaient relâchés, c'est assez exceptionnel, moi aussi je m'étais fait cette remarque, et que maintenant de plus en plus de chercheurs commencent à travailler de manière éthique, à faire attention à ça, alors qu'il y a encore une dizaine d'années, non un peu avant, mais la génération d'avant, personne ne se serait posé la question, même pas une seconde. Donc pour lui, ce qu'il faut faire, c'est mettre en avant ces chercheurs. Ils expliquent qu'eux, ils ont une politique dans Animal Sentience qui est de ne pas publier d'études ou de travaux qui auraient pu faire souffrir des animaux. Et que...
I forgot the end. What was the end?
So do I. I don't remember what I said.
Ah, dans l'ensemble, c'était ça. Quoi, que,
It's been too long a day for me. My brain is starting to...
mais donc voilà, qu'on commençait à avoir un changement dessus, que ça se posait... Ah oui. Et que donc maintenant, le problème, c'est que si on observe hors laboratoire, c'est un peu ce que je disais tout à l'heure, c'est beaucoup plus compliqué parce qu'il y a beaucoup de données qui rentrent en ligne de compte qu'on ne peut pas forcément contrôler, mais en même temps c'est quelque chose qui est plus authentique également. Donc de plus en plus les chercheurs essaient de travailler dans le milieu écologique des poissons, mais c'est pas toujours évident. Il y a des moments où pour pouvoir contrôler vraiment tous les paramètres, ils sont obligés de procéder de manière expérimentale en laboratoire. Mais voilà, il y a un mouvement qui commence à se développer dans la recherche pour faire attention à avoir des méthodes un peu plus éthiques vis-à-vis des animaux expérimentés.
Sign is trying to make a statement here.
Somehow the end, I think.
That's the sign's way of saying if we don't protect them, they will collapse.
Donc, comme la bannière, si on ne les protège pas, ils vont tomber. Enfin, bon, c'est bon.
Merci.
Je vais parler d'abord en anglais, je dirais ça en français. First of all, Professor, thank you very much for your presentation. It was really very fascinating, and we learned very much about fishes. I never know if you have to say fish or fishes. I just have two pieces of information I want to share. You might know them already, but one is good and one is bad. I'll start with the bad one. I heard the statistic the other day that if the current trend continues, by 2050, there will be more plastic in the oceans than actually fishes in terms of mass. So it's very important that we reduce the amount of fish that we actually take out of the oceans, I believe. And the other piece of information is good news, is that I believe it was recently created a very large marine reserve in Antarctica, which is something like 30 times the surface of Switzerland. And so I wanted to have your opinion about the importance of creating marine reserves around the world where the fish have time to reproduce, and I would encourage everybody here to support in any way they can the creation of such sanctuaries for fish.
Thank you for those pieces of information. Yes, I'd heard about both of those, and I'll just comment on the second one. The rise in number of sanctuaries, protected areas for ocean life, is encouraging to see. President Obama, President Bush before him in the U.S. Declared unprecedented large areas of ocean habitat. It's still a fraction of the whole, but it's a trend that's encouraging to see. There's a couple of countries, I think Indonesia is one, where they take poaching of fishes very seriously. They will actually remove the humans on the boat and then blow the boat up. You can watch YouTube videos of that too, to send a message, but also simply to destroy the boat that's doing harm. Obviously, poaching is a human construct. From the fish's point of view, it's all poaching. It's all fishing that shouldn't be happening, but at least that's a step in the right direction. I just wanted to mention a statistic that I think is very telling in terms of the rise in ecotourism. Is another way that we benefit by leaving habitats alone, by protecting the wildlife. People can stroke fishes and swim with them, which is nice. But it's been estimated that a shark who is killed for the fins, or for the meat for that matter, is worth on average about $90. If the shark is allowed to live 20 to 30 years, the lifespan of a typical shark, the shark is worth just under $2 million through ecotourism. This was a calculation made based on ecotourism receipts, the profit from people being able to, wanting to go and swim and see sharks on their dives. So that's a very clear comparison of the benefits to a country if you want to just think in terms of dollars, which is not the only value we should think of, but if you want to think in terms of money, and let's face it, a lot of people do, we do much better to leave them alive over the course of their lives. They're much more valuable that way than if we kill them.
Je vais peut-être reprendre la question en français ou...
Je peux le dire en français si tu veux.
Ouais, parce que je connais pas les chiffres exacts.
D'accord, j'avais juste deux infos à donner, une bonne et une mauvaise. La mauvaise en premier, c'est que si on ne change pas nos pratiques rapidement envers les poissons, d'ici 2050, il y aura dans les océans plus de masse de plastique que de poissons. La bonne nouvelle, c'est qu'il a été créé récemment par accord des pays des Nations Unies une très grande réserve marine en Antarctique. Et je demandais au professeur Balcombe ce qu'il pensait de la création de réserves marines et de leur importance pour que les poissons aient le temps de se reproduire.
Et donc la réponse c'était, donc il n'a pas rebondi sur le plastique. Et la réponse au sujet donc, des réserves marines, il explique qu'effectivement ça a été une forte tendance sous Obama qui se poursuit. Et
je suis pas sûr. The marine creation, marine protection, is it continuing with Trump?
I don't think so. I don't know about that.
Ok, on va s'arrêter Obama.
It remains to be seen.
Il n'est pas très sûr que ça continue sous Trump. Et il explique aussi qu'une bonne nouvelle, c'est que beaucoup de pays asiatiques prennent très au sérieux le braconnage de poissons. Mais que, bon, du point de vue des poissons, de toute façon, toute pêche est un braconnage, finalement. Mais donc, le braconnage des poissons, et qu'on pouvait même voir des vidéos sur YouTube où, quand ils arrêtaient les braconniers, ils font sortir les humains du bateau, ils font exploser le bateau sur place. Il explique également qu'il y a eu des travaux qui ont été faits, et par exemple avec les requins, où quand on tue des requins, que ce soit pour leur aileron ou pour la viande, les requins valent à peu près $90. Quand c'est comparé avec ce qu'il vaudrait pour le tourisme écologique, c'est-à-dire les gens qui viendraient pour voir les requins sur la durée de vie du requin, on s'aperçoit qu'économiquement, il vaudrait quasiment $2 millions. Donc ça serait même économiquement beaucoup plus rentable de les laisser vivre que de les tuer.
It's $90 dead and $2 million alive.
D'autres questions? Peut-être j'en profite avant pour dire qu'on y aura un apéro après, donc ne quittez pas la salle si ça dit.
You show us some pictures of fish from the Lake Tanganyika. The fish architect who is doing like a Gothic roses to attract the women. I saw that in the Lake Tanganyika too. And we spoke about the industry of farms, but we did not speak about the industry of fish farms in the close lakes like Lake Victoria, Lake Tanganyika, Lake Kivu, and the close river like you have in the Mississippi. We'd like to hear your ideas about that, because I think in Mississippi you have now crazy fish that jump in boats. I've seen that eat everything, and I would like to protect those little fish in Lake Tanganyika. And then when we buy a tilapia fillet, we have to think about it. J'aimerais juste parler de ces poissons architectes qui font des rosaces merveilleuses pour attirer les femelles. On en a beaucoup au lac Tanganyika, et je voulais qu'il nous dise son point de vue sur le fait qu'il y a aussi des fermes d'élevage dans les mers fermées, je pense aux grands lacs comme le lac Victoria, et que nous, on achète notre filet de tilapia en bonne conscience, mais on va exterminer tous ces poissons qui sont extrêmement rares et qui ont justement de l'empathie. Ils tiennent leur bébé dans la bouche ou des choses comme ça. They keep their babies in their mouths. I've seen that in the Lake Tanganyika. I would like to have your opinion.
And that's all it really would be, is because clearly you have more knowledge of that than I do. I've not swam in Lake Tanganyika. I've read a little bit about it, and it's a noted lake for the incredible diversity of these cichlid fishes in particular, which have the mouth brooding, and parental care, and some other really interesting behaviors. And because they're endemic to those lakes, they are vulnerable. If they're extirpated from the lake, that may be the end of the species. And then you also mentioned introduced species. That's of course a problem. I always find it interesting that we are more ready to persecute introduced species, even though it's no fault of their own that they end up there. It's almost always human activity that took them there. And it's a little unfair to turn around and say, that should not be there. So I think we should always apply ethical principles regardless of how the animal got there, because it's a sentient creature. And as I like to say, sentience the bedrock of ethics. That's the basis for how we should act morally towards an animal, regardless of its ecological place. I think that's maybe the most I could say about that.
Donc, pour professeur Balcombe, répond que ça se limitera à être une opinion parce que manifestement il en connaît moins que le monsieur sur le sujet. Il mentionne que le lac Tanganyika est un lac très très célèbre pour sa grande diversité de poissons de la famille des cyclides, qui est spécifiquement ce lac effectivement a une variété. Vous avez des espèces à 2 mètres de différence, des espèces complètement différentes. Et ensuite, il parlait de l'introduction des espèces également, en disant que l'humain introduit beaucoup d'espèces dans différents endroits qui peuvent ensuite causer des problèmes écologiques, et qu'à ce moment-là, on n'y réfléchit plus que d'une question écologique et on décide d'abattre ou de ces choses-là, et qu'au contraire, on devrait toujours y raisonner de manière éthique, puisque ce sont des animaux sentients et que la sentience, ça devrait être la base absolue de toute décision morale, en fin de compte, lorsqu'on prend une décision.
Wow.
I think someone's signaling we soon move on to the wine stage of the evening. I can hear you.
Question. There is a new way to protect animals, which is a political action.
Political actions.
Is it okay here? So, very simple questions. There is a new way now to protect animals, so, which is to create a political party, which is more pushy and to put pressure on governments and economy. Because we are not talking a lot tonight about money and what this means in practice, all the lobbies and this kind of thing. So my question is very simple. What is your view of this new way to protect fish or animals by political action?
Juste la redire en français parce que j'ai pas bien entendu.
Oh yes, okay, please.
Donc en français, il y a une nouvelle tendance assez récente de protéger les animaux en général, c'est de créer des partis politiques et d'essayer de mettre la pression sur les lobbies et donc évidemment les gouvernements. Et je sais juste savoir quelle était son opinion sur l'intérêt des choses et justement cette nouvelle tendance, si je peux dire, pour protéger les animaux.
Thanks for the question, and I'm glad you raised it because it hasn't been mentioned at all tonight. And that is that political. My take on that is that political changes, the laws protecting animals, and going far beyond what we have now. But humane kind of laws. It's helpful, but not really what we need. We need laws that recognize animals as beings who have a life that matters, as having fundamental, basic rights. That will be a big change, and it's critical. We absolutely have to have that, and we have to continue working towards that. It's not all or nothing. We can certainly change behavior in the meantime, and often it trickles up where behavior changes that lead to pressure that get laws changed. But having laws in place gives you traction to enforce the law, which is a challenge in itself. Nevertheless, you have the law, and it indicates that society is changing how it views things. It's like society sees this as a valid issue. So I think that's very significant in terms of legal changes. There was something else I wanted to say about that. I can't remember what it was, but definitely there's rumblings the Non-Human Rights Project, you may have heard of this. Steve Wise, an American lawyer, beginning to get some success now. They're starting with the so-called low-hanging fruit, the easiest cases, the foot-in-the-door cases, chimpanzees, most people don't need as much convincing that a chimpanzee is worthy of some kind of respect and protection compared to a codfish or an Oscar. That's a more challenging case to be made. So start with the easier ones, and then once you've established that a non-human can have fundamental rights and have some standing under the law, then you're in a much better position to try and expand that to other species. It may be a while before fishes are embraced that way, but we have to start somewhere, and I think that's a good approach. So I think it's critical that we change legal standing of animals. We have to do that.
Donc le professeur Balcombe va d'abord remercier pour cette question, justement parce qu'il n'a pas eu l'occasion d'en parler durant sa conférence, qu'effectivement, à l'heure actuelle, il existe quelques lois, encore que chez nous, pour les poissons, c'est vraiment minime, mais qu'il existe quelques lois, mais que ça va vraiment pas assez loin, qu'il faut effectivement essayer de combattre en politique pour réussir à avoir des lois qui reconnaissent vraiment les autres animaux comme étant des êtres sentients, qui ont des vies, pour lesquels les vies comptent, et que c'est pour eux que ces lois devraient être faites, plus que des lois vraiment typiquement humaines. Et il mentionne le Non-Human Rights Project de Steve Wise aux États-Unis, qui essaie d'obtenir des extensions de la loi humaine pour des grands singes, notamment des chimpanzés, puisqu'il part du concept qu'à partir du moment où il va réussir à mettre un pied dans la porte, et ben ensuite il va pouvoir forcer la loi telle qu'elle est pour pouvoir l'étendre à plein d'autres espèces. Donc par exemple, quand il y a des singes en laboratoire, des chimpanzés en laboratoire, ils vont causer des procès pour... je ne connais plus exactement les cas, donc ce que je dis c'est une invention, c'est pas exactement comme ça que ça a été fait, mais par exemple, ils vont pousser des cas au tribunal pour avoir des dommages et intérêts, par exemple, pour qu'ils puissent avoir une retraite paisible après avoir vécu dans des laboratoires. Je ne sais plus exactement quels étaient les cas, mais ça a été des choses comme ça. En Argentine, ils avaient essayé, alors il a été dit que c'était un habeas corpus, mais ce n'est pas exactement un habeas corpus qui a essayé d'être passé, mais voilà, il y a un travail qui est fait pour pouvoir essayer d'étendre les lois existantes déjà humaines sur des espèces, on va dire, faciles à gagner comme les chimpanzés, puisque on n'a pas vraiment de justification pour dire non, pas eux, puisqu'au niveau comportement, ils sont quand même très proches, et de manière à ensuite pouvoir étendre ça de plus en plus à d'autres espèces. Donc il estime qu'effectivement, la démarche politique et la démarche des lois est quelque chose d'absolument critique dans le mouvement et qu'il faut vraiment s'engager là-dedans fortement.
Good evening and thank you for coming. Really interested in your work. I want to follow on from the question before. Fish don't vote. So any...
Yes, they do, the herrings do.
So any legislation is going to take a lot of time if we're working on altruistic ideas. In the meantime, following on from this gentleman's point, microplastics in the ocean, 4 out of 10 fish are found to have ingested them. This is affecting even humans eating it. So in one sense, there's an advantage to that hopefully fish will be less appealing to eat. They'll become a food security issue. But on the other side, we're going to end up with fish that are going to be very, very sick for many years to come. So the point of all of this, of your awareness, do we have time? How can we as individuals make this a priority? And other than just creating awareness, are there any specific actions that you would recommend that individuals, groups, or governments could do that would lead to a faster action?
Donc la question, globalement, c'est, sachant que tout le monde va souffrir à peu près à court terme dans cette histoire, c'est-à-dire que ce soit les humains ou les poissons, est-ce que ça doit devenir une priorité et comment faire justement pour pouvoir augmenter, ça rejoint un peu une question tout à l'heure, Madame l'a précisé justement qu'elle poursuivait ces questions, comment procéder en tant que groupe ou individu pour pouvoir faire avancer un peu plus ces questions. Je m'excuse s'il y a une partie que j'ai pas bien entendue.
It's a great question, and it's one that deserves a better answer than I can give. But at 30 hours awake, I'm not. My brain is breaking down. So I would just address one thing that you asked at the end. Do we have time? And nobody really knows. As you say, plastics are a persistent issue. They're going in the wrong direction, and they don't go away fast. So that may be an issue we're dealing with for a long time. But let's just say, hypothetically, we were doomed. We were already past a threshold where we're just simply not going to recover, and the Earth's life system is going to collapse, and it's going to be mayhem. I feel like if that were the case, and no one can know for sure, but let's just say that were the case, we should still work for the best world we can get with what we have. The best outcome, or the least bad outcome. Of course, if as I hope, we can recover, then it doesn't change anything. We should still work for the best outcome, right? So I think we have no choice but to treat it as if it's an optimistic view and that we can actually turn it around and save the planet. So regardless of the prognosis, the treatment, such as it is the same. We work for change constantly. We talk about it, we advocate, and we behave as individuals we live a lifestyle that we think is consistent with our ethics. That's a very important part of that as well. So I think the outcome is the same regardless of the prognosis.
Donc en gros la réponse c'est que effectivement la situation est extrêmement dégradée et que si jamais on admettait qu'à l'heure actuelle on est déjà passé un seuil qui fait qu'on va à l'effondrement des populations de poissons et probablement un autre passage dans ce cas-là, et bien qu'à ce moment-là de toute façon il faudrait quand même continuer à faire ça puisque il faut garder l'aspect optimiste du fait que plus on pourra sauver de vie, mieux ce sera. Et que le meilleur moyen de faire, c'est d'essayer de mener une vie qui est la plus proche possible de notre éthique personnelle, la plus cohérente possible, et en permanence d'essayer d'informer, de transmettre ces connaissances et de faire tout notre possible pour, si jamais il n'est pas trop tard, éviter justement qu'il soit trop tard.